welcoming you on behalf of the School of Social Transformation here to our second in a series of 3 talks by a collection of wonderful justice-seeking individuals who work in collective ways to create change in the state of Arizona. It is such a pleasure to have Caroline Isaacs here with us this afternoon. I also want to thank the staff and other colleagues who have made this possible, including our students who are here today to have a conversation with our guest speaker. You might already understand that Caroline Isaacs is the program director, executive director, really, of Just Communities Arizona. What an appropriately named organization for this series. And she has over 2 decades of experience advocating for just and effective criminal justice policy here in Arizona. Not an easy place to do that work, as we will learn this afternoon. She is a leading voice in the movement to end mass incarceration. And I know so many of our students and colleagues are committed to the same end goal, and that there's a variety of ways of trying to get there. One of the interesting things about the organization of Just Communities Arizona is that its staff represent 3 of our 3 main state universities, right? You've got staff from NAU, U of A, and ASU. So that's a nice collaboration right there. I will say also that our guest has authored several reports on criminal justice policy and sentencing, the poor performance of private prison companies here in Arizona, and conditions more generally in correctional facilities. And you can find her work in a variety of places like the New York Times, Salon.com, Dan Rather Reports, In These Times, The Hill, The Nation, Al Jazeera America, the Huffington Post, and a real variety of state and local outlets. You might see her, for example, having been interviewed in the Arizona Republic or speaking on KJAZ. She does hold a bachelor's degree in political science from the College of Worcester, and is a master's in social work. We love our social workers here, from Arizona State University. So Caroline, I'll let you take it away. We're going to have lots of questions for you, but I know you have comments already prepared for us to start as well.
Thank you so much, Madeline, and everyone to be here with you today and talk about really the next iteration of our work as Just Communities Arizona. So as Madeline mentioned, my name is Caroline Isaacs. I'm the executive director of Just Communities Arizona. And our mission is to create new models for safety and justice outside the punishment system. So what does that mean exactly? Well, PowerPoint that will explain all of this to you. If I can share my screen, which is right here, and then we'll start the slideshow. All right, everybody seeing that? And me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Groovy. All right. So here we are. Let's see if I can advance. Great. So I find that the best way to help people understand this mission is to connect them to their own lived experience and really kind of step out of the study and the rhetoric and the theory and really get into our own lives and our histories and what we know to be true. So if you can indulge me in a bit of a kumbaya moment here, just hang with me for a second. I would like to begin with a little thought experiment. So settle in your seat, deep breath, close your eyes if you're comfortable with that, whatever works for you. But take a moment to envision and really inhabit a time in your life when you have felt most safe. And I leave it to you to define what that means, what safety means for this memory for you. But really think about, what did that feel like? What were the qualities of that experience of safety? And think about what created that condition for you. Who was there? What needs did you have that were being met? And just take a moment to really try to remember the sensations and the sounds, maybe smells of that experience of safety for you in your life. And I want to acknowledge that some people will struggle with this exercise, and it may actually be painful or triggering for some of us, because some of us live our lives without ever having this experience of truly feeling safe. So if that's you, I apologize, and I want to give you a moment to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. You want to walk away from this for a second, check your phone, if you're not already, and just take care of yourself. But if you haven't had this experience, consider maybe in those moments when you felt unsafe, what did you wish you had? What did you long for? What did you see other people having that made them safe that you didn't have? What do you think, or who do you think might have helped you to feel safe? So take a moment, just kind of be in that, hold that memory for a second. I do this exercise a lot, and I would love if we were all in person to have everyone, kind of chime in, tell me what, if they felt comfortable sharing those experiences of safety. But since we are here in the world of Zoom, I'm just going to talk to you about what I tend to hear when I ask people this question. So the types of responses I typically get are descriptions of being cared for and nurtured by family, right? So in my parents' bed during a thunderstorm, or after I had a nightmare as a kid, being with friends, finding a peer group that accepts me and where I belong, community, riding bikes with my friends, going down the street to somebody else's house for dinner. People also have associations with time spent in nature, camping trips with family or playing in the woods as a kid, and with animals, like a family pet. What I rarely hear is this. Rarely hear people say that they feel safe when they are in the presence of law enforcement, or in a courtroom, or in a jail or a prison, right? But in the public discourse, these guys, whoops, sorry. I especially love the guy with the big gun. That is supposed to make us feel. Public safety is associated with surveillance, arrests, prosecution, and incarceration. It's what elected officials focus on, and it's what gets funded. And so this disconnect between what we know intrinsically makes us safe and this is at the heart of what's wrong with our system. And for just communities, it's the key to how we take the next step to do something better. Excuse me, I'm coming off a cold, so I'm going to have to clear my throat a lot. I apologize. So in the current system, here's how these things are defined. Safety is the absence or decrease in crime and associated violence. Full stop. Justice is finding out who's responsible for crime and associated violence and removing them from society, i.e. what's called incapacitation, and denying them certain freedoms to limit their ability to do further harm. And this process is designed as a negative consequence, punishment, for those who have committed crime, and it's supposed to act as a deterrent to deter others who might consider engaging in the same behavior because now they're aware of these negative consequences that they will face, punishment. And for this reason, We at JCA, in part of our work is about narrative change. You'll notice that I very intentionally use the term punishment system and not criminal justice system. And that's because this is what it is. This is what it is intended to do, how it was built, and what it is for. And you'll find that punishment actually does not create safety. We've known this for a long time. Crime rates, for example, are extremely variable. There's no direct correlation to how harsh your sentencing laws are or how many cops you have in your community. It's based on a lot of other factors. And the punishment system actually creates the opposite of safety for many people, most notably communities of color. Arrests, jail stays, court proceedings, incarceration actually are in and of themselves traumatizing and sometimes violent. This system is actually posing more of a threat to our communities than the crime and criminals that we are encouraged to be fearful of. So please consider these fun facts. The fifth highest incarceration rate in the country. Are we the fifth safest state in the country by any measure that you can think of? I would argue not. But what's more, I think, telling is the second statistic. 1 in 13 of us, people, adults living in the state of Arizona, have a criminal conviction on our record. 1 in 13 of us. Compared to 1 in, I think it's about 20, are active violent crime, right? So you are literally more likely to be sucked into the punishment system than you are to be the victim of violent crime in this state, right? So which is the greater threat to our safety and to our freedom? This is why it is critical that we expand our definition of safety and begin to think about ways that we as a society can move away from punishment and toward real solutions to problems that we all face. And it begins with a better understanding of the root causes of crime, which happen to be the root causes of things that can lead to real safety. So who studied hierarchy in whatever? We all did. What's up, Maslow? Right? Everybody, I assume everybody has seen this. Madeline's laughing, so I'm going to take that as a that I'm not completely off, right? But take a look at this, right? What is the thing that we all fundamentally need, right? These are the things that make us physically, emotionally, and in all other ways safe. The basics. You got to have enough food to eat. You need to have a place to live. And to have those things, you need to have gainful employment, resources, access to healthcare. All of those things are what make us safe. So maybe nobody stole your Amazon package off your porch, but if you can't pay your rent and you're facing eviction, are you safe? If your kid is so bullied that she's considering suicide, is she safe? If there's no grocery store in the community where you live and you're subsisting on McDonald's and stuff you buy at Circle K, are you safe? We all know, and our a little thought experiment at the beginning here showed that safety is much more than not experiencing crime. But we as a society consistently fail to ask people, what is it that they want and need to be safe? So that for us at Just Communities, Madeline mentioned the many nerdy reports that we have produced over the years. That's kind of our MO, right? Is to start with a knowledge base. And often it's one that doesn't exist already. Because again, these are questions that aren't getting asked of the people that they should be asked of. So if we're basing our policy on evidence-based practices, where are we getting our evidence from? Who are we considering to be experts on safety. And from our perspective, it's the people who are most directly impacted by this system. Those are the folks that are going to be able to give us the most accurate information about what creates safety and what doesn't, what needs are present in communities, and what needs are actually being fulfilled. So a few years ago, Dr. Grace Gomez, a staff person at the time, here in our office, very proud graduate of this very program, as a matter of fact, some of you may even know her, set out to do just that, to say, what if we just actually had a conversation and asked people? And in this case, we asked people in one neighborhood, one very particular neighborhood in Tucson that is majority Latinx, that is considered a policing hotspot by TPD, that has a very high rate of incarceration and people coming back home out of incarceration, and is completely under-resourced, right? It's a food desert. There's no grocery store. There's, liquor stores and pawn shops and check cashing places, right? That's Barrio Centro. So let's go to Barrio Centro and say to people, what makes you feel safe? What does safety look and feel like? What resources exist in truly safe communities? So that's what we did. So we did a qualitative study project with the residents of Barrio Centro, and we asked them 4 questions, open-ended. What does safety feel like? What resources are present in healthy, thriving communities? What does safety look like? What's present there? And what resources would you like to see in your neighborhood? And the kinds of responses that we got, which again, this is a qualitative survey, so it's just people saying things. And so we went through, did all the analyses of that data and grouped those responses into kind of categories. And my guess is the kind of stuff that I imagine all of you were connecting to in our earlier exercise. Number 1, in describing what safety feels like, more than half of the respondents spoke about community and community relations. The most prevalent theme raised included the opportunity to have meaningful relationships with one's neighbors and to be in trusting relation with those who serve the neighborhood. So here's some quotes from what people said. People take care of each other. They look after common spaces and help each other out with their yards. Kids play outside. We all greet each other. There aren't police around. People and families are out and about on the street, know each other, where there are public gatherings put on by the neighborhood and people can get to know each other. What makes me feel safe is seeing people use the park, walking, using the bike path, and knowing our neighbors. People out and about, walking dogs, running, working on their yard, house, or cars, sitting on their porch, etc. Right? When you know your neighbors, you look out for each other, and you're a lot less likely to call the cops on each other or on each other's kids, right? These are community relationships, and it is very basic. Just knowing who are the people who live around you and having some kind of relationship with them. Excuse me. Another major theme, oh, my slides got all funky. That says economic self-determination, sorry. Unsurprisingly, themes were employment and affordable housing was a big one, right? Fundamental aspect of safety is the ability to provide for your basic needs, food, shelter, medical care. Shout out to Maslow. Education was another consistent theme, along with other resources for kids to learn, play, and have support. So here are some of the responses. Not gated, clean/litter-free, safe spaces for the homeless, no gentrification/segregation, schools that represent a variety of ethnicities and income levels, employment that is better than leaving people as working class poor, healthy food options, safe spaces to gather, good schools, solid housing stock, mixed density, and a healthy mix of socioeconomic demographics, nearby jobs, right? Pretty obvious thing that contributes to safety. And is this kind of, I guess, catch-all of what we put together as beauty, play, and recreation. Having parks, spaces for outdoor recreation, gardens, places for kids to play again. Respondents called for children's museums, creative spaces, murals. I love this one, good noise, such as laughter, children playing, adults talking, everyone looking out for each other's children and pets. After-school programs led by local community members of color, parks, gardens, cultural events, gyms, shopping, and restaurants, right? Not really that surprising, but what's surprising is that we don't ask this question and we don't categorize these things as contributing to safety. I love this direct quote from one of the respondents because it's just so, I think just really encapsulates a profoundly different approach to safety. Safe communities invest in arts, leisure, sustainable food systems, and take a proactive approach to ensuring people are active, healthy, and living in a thriving environment. That's safety. So the good news here is that communities know how to create safety, and they always have. Particularly under-resourced and abandoned communities intimately know. What's the term? That if they wait for the state to feed them, they'll starve waiting and wait starving, right? That you have to create your own opportunities, that you have to look out for each other because the government is not going to do that for you, right? They learn to look for and create pathways, shared spaces, and opportunities. And when they find those opportunities, they creatively reproduce, circulate, and multiply those resources to survive and thrive. They share. They work together. True alternatives we're finding, as opposed to the framework that we've tended to have of like policy from the top down, like we will have this policy and then that will create safety for everyone, is that actually it has to be very place-based because each community is facing slightly different challenges and needs slightly different solutions. So true alternatives are micro and completely divorced from the punishment system. They already exist. They've always existed. We just need to notice them and view them as contributing to community safety and begin to flip the script on what public safety actually looks like. So if we have a few more minutes on time, we're getting there. I'd like to share a few examples of organizations in our great state of Arizona. And I tried to put as many like contact numbers in here as possible, but very happy to share links and everything for these folks and many more with you after the presentation. So this is David Garcia, except his head is cut off on my slide anyway, and his daughter. David started the Barrio Restoration Project, which was, I kid you not, him riding around on his bike, which you see in the back that has this groovy trailer, and just cleaning up his South Tucson neighborhood. Like just cleaning trash off the street and pulling weeds. But then as he does that, folks come out and they start to help, and then they organize together as a neighborhood. And then people are talking and meeting each other and creating that community that we heard so much about, taking pride in the place where they live, contributing to it and saying, this is our neighborhood and we love this place, right? That's community safety. And he just did that because it needed to be done, right? He didn't get a grant from anywhere. He just responded to a need that he saw in his community. That's down here in Tucson. There are great examples of community health and wellness programs that are led by volunteers. Patch, Phoenix Advocates for Community Health, Allies for Community Health, is an all-volunteer clinic, free and low cost for folks that don't have health insurance. And Unlimited Potential is a program also in the Phoenix area that has community health workers that go out into the community and do educational events and vaccination clinics and just respond to whatever it is that folks need in the place where they are. This here is Ernest House. Danny Howe right here. This is in Tucson. Danny was incarcerated for a number of years here in Arizona, and he got out and kind of went through what little reentry programs actually existed and realized that he could do a lot better. And so he has. He opened Ernest House, which is a transitional housing program for people coming out of prison. And it has just taken off. And he's adding, again, organically, these other kinds of programs to meet the needs of his residents. So they started a kettle corn stand. So it's actually teaching people a skill, right? It's actually generating some income for the program, and it's getting folks out in the community and learning, public service skills. In addition, you see down here him with this doggo. They just initiated a program with the Pima Animal Shelter, which is completely overflowing right now. And they're fostering dogs at the halfway house. So the residents are providing that service to the animal shelter. And of course, just having that experience to care for animals is also deeply healing stuff. And Danny's won all kinds of awards. So here he is getting like the 40 Under 40 award in Tucson and Better Business Bureau and all of that stuff, just by saying, this is the thing that people need, so I'm going to do it. Another big one that we're seeing some incredible homegrown efforts to address are things around food security through community gardening, agriculture, and sustainability organizations like Flowers and Bullets and Regeneración here in Tucson, which are about community empowerment through growing your own food, and also learning indigenous and Mexican food culture ideas and historic ways of growing your own food, harvesting prickly pear, water harvesting, ability skills that also, can sometimes be a little economic side hustle for folks in need. Project Roots is all about creating space for Black farmers in Phoenix to grow food, and also assisting through, they run a soup kitchen. And Tiger Mountain Foundation also works with people coming out of prison through sort of micro business opportunities from growing food, and also doing learning projects with folks. At last, I apologize, the screenshot just turned out so terrible, but the Outlaw Project here in Tucson is a program creating tiny houses, like small, sustainable housing programs for transgender women of color, right? Like there's no greater basic need for safety than a place where you are going to be free of discrimination and abuse and can live safely. Am I moving? There we go. So we know what works, and we keep doing the thing that doesn't work. And so part of the challenge here is that so much of our state, city, county resources are tied up still in punishment. So this is a snapshot of our Arizona state budget for this year. Obviously, education is a huge chunk, as it should be. That's the largest state agency budget. Second largest, access, public health, also very important. This blue chunk here, though, the third, largest chunk is prisons, courts, and the Department of Public Safety. Far greater than child safety, which is the teal color, and economic security, the Department of Economic Security, which is the orange, right? So budgets are moral documents. And what we invest in is what grows. And so until we are able to reverse this pipeline, we're just going to keep pursuing the same failed model. And that's partly because all of the stuff that we were just talking about that we know creates safety is not viewed through the lens of public safety in that public discourse, and will continue to be underfunded. It's an afterthought. So we found in our advocacy, as Madeline mentioned, at the state level, working with the legislature, trying to do sentencing reform, right, to say, why don't we change these laws and send fewer people to prison since the system is not working? That one of the real impediments to that was that there literally is no imagination for what else we could do that is not punishment. And so therefore, when you start talking about not doing punishment, it is actually scary to folks, right? You start getting this reaction of like, well, then who's going to keep us safe? How are we, what are we going to do about XYZ problems and these kinds of issues? And what about the violent offenders? What about this, that, and the other? If we don't have this punishment system. And so until we can provide and show how these community-based interventions actually create greater safety and posit them as public safety, we will be stuck with these reform efforts that are simply tinkering with the same punishment model, right? We're going to have a drug court instead of a regular court. We're going to, maybe offer some rehabilitation programs and try to make prisons nicer. But we really can't have fundamental systemic change until we talk about what kind of system would work better than the one that we have. And that has really been our work at JCA. We literally started calling this the what instead, as a shorthand for how can we create those models and demonstrate that there is another way. What could the world look like if it was not focused on punishment as a solution to every community problem? And so, as I mentioned, our MO here is creating new models or uplifting existing models for justice and safety outside the punishment system. And we do that by working alongside people with convictions, formerly incarcerated people, and our shared communities, because they know intimately what is needed, how the system we have is not working, and what could work better. And our work is about centering those stories, cultivating a new generation of community leaders, reframing justice through a lens of healing and true safety instead of retribution and punishment. And by doing so, dismantling those outdated ideas and hurtful systems of punishment and building community safety, truly community-based solutions. So what does that look like in the few minutes I have before we can take some questions? We've, after the work on the Barrio Safety Report, we found that the next step really is to gather qualitative data. And so Rebecca Felk in our office has created, done like a Herculean task of actually creating a survey project for the entire city of Tucson. We've collected over 1,200 individual survey responses from folks all across the city on asking these questions about safety and what resources are needed in people's communities to make them feel safer. How are we doing currently? and what could we be doing better. The results are available on our website in a data dashboard. We actually received a grant from Microsoft and the Urban Institute, and also funding from the city to be able to provide this data in real time. And you can filter the responses by demographic data, geography, where in the city people are, what ward they live in, people's income level, and a variety of variables to really drill down and see what are people thinking and feeling about safety in this one community. And we're compiling the results into a report, because gotta have a report, right? Or it didn't happen, that we will make available to the public. And our next step then is to take those results back to this community and say, what do you think? Did we get this right? What are we missing? What more do we need to know? And the most important question, what should we do next? Which we hope will then lead into organizing efforts in to make these programs stronger, build on those, and really move the money out of the punishment system and into these programs. We've also convened a community justice reinvestment network of over 60 organizations between Tucson and Phoenix that exemplify, and those examples that I showed you in the earlier slides are members of that network. I just pulled from the folks that we've been working with there. Small, community-based, in some cases don't even have a 501c3 yet, organizations that are responding to these community needs and building safety, but are not going to get filed under alternatives to incarceration or re-entry, even though those are things that they do. We've built this network, and we're really working together to uplift the work that they do and their successes, and to collectively organize and advocate for better visibility and funding of those programs. And finally, we're going to engage in budget advocacy and policy advocacy, most likely on the local level, city and county level, because again, these interventions, these alternatives exist on a very local level. And so if we can build here in the places where we are, those examples and models, then that begins to again create this demonstration of what works and what could we be doing more of. Again, the work is about really reversing this pipeline of people and money out of the punishment system and back into the hands of community. So what can you do? There's so much you can do. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that voting plays a part, right? And we do have an election coming up. There's a couple of resources here that I think are really incredibly useful, particularly for those kinds of races that people do not pay attention to, like the county attorney, which is the prosecutor for the county that you live in. That is the person who decides what people get charged, how much time they get charged with, how much prison time they're probably going to get. It is a hugely influential position, and it is a county-based election. So please pay attention to that. That's the Smart Justice link there. And the one above is for judges. Judges are elected in Arizona. And that's another one that often people don't have a lot of information about. So there are resources out there. If you can't find what you're looking for, let us know. But again, these are the making decisions about policy and making decisions about budgets, and I need to hear from you about what you prioritize. And support those organizations that I just told you about. Donate some money to them. They're often doing mutual aid drives and fundraisers and things like that. or volunteer, go work in a garden, show up for a work day, and just support and promote and, follow them on Facebook. That kind of stuff actually makes a huge difference. And I'm happy to send along more links if that's helpful. And, you can get down with us. So here's our contact information, our webpage. The data dashboard is there that I mentioned on the community safety work. So you can take a look at all that data from Tucson. Please like us on all the social media platforms, and send us an email. We're always happy to engage with folks, answer questions, provide resources, and be nerdy with you. So I will leave it there because I know there's a Q&A portion, but thank you so much for sitting through my PowerPoint.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And you probably can't hear people clapping for you or, doing whatever kind of cheering for you in their own homes or other classrooms. But it's a really important moment to reflect on all of the various initiatives that are being done without much fanfare, right? You're highlighting, you're amplifying the kind of work that are being done on the ground to help enact the kind of life that people want to lead based on their values. And they're doing it often without compensation, without acknowledgement, and they're doing it with other people in their neighborhoods. You said the local, you use the word micro to describe some of those initiatives that you highlighted for us. And that's really different from trying to fight, say, a statewide budget or legislation at the state level. Nevertheless, I do want to kick off the Q&A by asking you to comment a bit about some of the ways that you have engaged and how your organization and perhaps others with you have engaged in statewide advocacy to change our budget or change our laws. So maybe you can share a little bit about that experience. And in doing so, tell us why Arizona in particular may be a difficult place today to do criminal justice reform. It might not have always been that way, but why is it that way today, or maybe how it became that way over the years? And I'll collect some of the Q&As and we'll turn to the classroom soon enough.
Thanks. Yeah. So we have spent a lot of time engaged in that work of, sentencing reform at the state level. And really, when we began that, it was rare, and but became a growing movement somewhere, in the early 2000s, right? You saw lots of red states, conservatives, kind of coming out and saying, this criminal justice system is actually costing a lot of money and is really, recidivism rates are pretty high and it's not really doing what we thought it was going to do. And you sort of saw this wave all of a sudden of interest in sentencing reform. So we really tried to capitalize on that. Here, studying the successful models from other states, particularly conservative majority states like ours, we convened a statewide left-right sentencing reform coalition with folks like Right on Crime and U.S. Justice Action Network, which is a Koch brothers organization, Americans for Prosperity, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, so state and national partners, local groups, right? Because in other states, you could see where you can make this argument depending on where a given lawmaker really was coming from. You could talk about how the system is wasteful and is bleeding money and expensive. Or you could talk about, if someone highlights their Christian beliefs, you could talk about the ethics of forgiveness and redemption. Groups like Prison Fellowship have been using. And what we found was that did not work here. Oddly enough, we would talk about the cost, and it was a lot of it was don't bother me with the facts, right? That folks in leadership in Arizona, we would hear one-on-one that they empathize with us, they understand the issue, would share their personal stories, right? Because most of us know somebody who's been impacted by this system. So they would talk about their friend or their in-law or their employees, if they're business owners who've been impacted by the system. And then they basically say, but did I just mute myself? Am I here? Okay. So there was this disconnect, right? Like one-on-one, folks are on board, they understand, they might empathize, but then collectively, there was not the political will. And there are a couple of reasons for that. There are some very powerful individuals that were opponents to sentencing reform, often prosecutors, those elected prosecutors from places like Maricopa County, Yavapai County, that would engage very actively in the legislative process, and use unusual scare tactics around like, these liberals want to just let everybody out and it's going to be chaos and mayhem. So we would, get, kind of right up to the cliff, and bills would move and we'd have sponsors, and then poof. So I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to further my lifelong mission, which is to expose a guy by the name of Steve Twist. So I will send you all a link to explore for your education. This guy, Steve Twist, is really kind of behind the scenes. He was a personal mentor to many of those individuals that I talked about who became obstructionists. And he's extremely influential through his family ties, through his history. I won't go into the whole thing, read the article. But that's the kind of thing that can actually happen in a state like this, where there's not the political will of the majority party to move something ahead. You might have one or two individual champions, which we have over the years. But as far as really making significant change, if there are powerful enough folks blocking that, it's very, very difficult to do more than kind of little bites at the apple, which we've certainly done, and which I don't want to completely, undercut, because this change is always going to be incremental. And there have been real strides made in a state like Arizona, where this wasn't a conversation at all for many years. I think there's really been progress, but as far as the kind of like big breakthroughs that Madeline, you mentioned from other states, no, we were not able.
Thanks, Caroline. And we'll share that link just as soon as we're able to do so. We do live in a state that is infamous for locking people up. And I think the contrast between the numbers of people who are locked up, I think we're the 5th highest, as you mentioned, for the number of people who are incarcerated per population. We have Louisiana, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Arkansas above us. Below us is Texas, actually, interestingly enough. So there's something about, you said the budget is a moral document, that's something to explore. I know that there are some students who are watching, and there's also some questions coming into the Q&A, which everyone's welcome who are attending virtually to participate in. One of the questions we have here, I'm just going to restate it. What do you think should be the highest priority as far as preventative measures that should be taken? And maybe our attendee could clarify that. Preventative in terms of crime prevention, do you think, or preventive measures in terms of minimizing the amount invested in the punishment system? So I'll pitch both questions to you for now while we wait for a clarification.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to come at this. I think, you know, if we were thinking again from that top-down policy perspective, like what could we do that would make the single biggest chunk, the biggest change in this? It would really be, I think, you know, we talk about prevention. Answer honestly, because the best prevention is to change the law. Laws are created by people, and I think we have this tendency to think that they are, you know, came down on like stone tablets from somewhere. But really, laws are created by individuals and groups, and not always with the same intentions that we would hope that they have. So if we changed our drug sentencing laws, for example, to account for the fact that substance abuse and drug use is a public health problem and not a criminal act, if we treated addiction as an epidemic and did not criminalize it, our prison population would shrink overnight. The vast majority of people in prison and jail are there for some drug-related issue. Either they were in violation of some drug law that we have, or their addiction led them to the behavior that got them on the radar of the criminal justice system. So if you want to think about it in terms of like, what is big policy change, that would be it. But, you know, prevention, and you know, I know we're trying to get that clarification, but again, looking at what people need and solving problems, if we stopped looking at social issues as how can we make this thing that we don't like illegal, as if that's going to stop it from happening, and actually look at why is this thing happening? That's prevention, right? So again, that could be issues around addiction, that could be issues around mental illness, it could just be poverty, it could be lack of opportunity. And that's where, again, these community-based interventions are actually probably going to be the most successful interventions, but they are, again, micro, right? Because that's responding to the particular conditions of a place where people live.
Thanks, Caroline. And I think from that ProPublica piece that would, again, we'll circulate as soon as we're able to, there was a great quotation there from a mother and a wife who was concerned about the lengthy incarceration of her husband, father of her children. And the quote was something like, "You can't punish a drug addiction out of somebody." I thought that was just a very poignant way of saying it very, very clearly. Well, we do have a couple questions from the classroom. So if Professor Holman wants to unmute the classroom and see if we can get our technology to work. And if it doesn't, our colleague will convey the questions to us personally.
Yes, thanks so much, Maddie. We do have a couple questions. Mia, you're up first. And let us know, please, if you cannot hear my students.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the profitability of incarceration systems. I feel like I've heard a lot about how the prison industrial complex makes a lot of money off of incarceration. I was just wondering how you could even elaborate on that and how that plays a role in policy.
So I'm just going to ask Chris to restate the question since it was a little garbled so that everyone who's here can understand what the question is being asked. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, yeah. Can you hear me? I'm really sorry. I turned the volume up so that you could hear Mia, and then I just blasted away my students. So we're all having a little reaction to that. My apologies. Mia, basically you were asking about the profitability, essentially of the prison industrial complex and how that factors into the policy making and the subsequent outcomes, and especially in a state here, like in Arizona or California, where it's such big business.
You betcha. Yeah, we spent a lot of time looking at both prison privatization of the management of facilities, and the result is that essentially every aspect of this system has been monetized and profitized, right? So you have now businesses springing up to take advantage of efforts at reform, right? So like, oh, we're gonna put people on ankle bracelet monitors instead of prison, and that's an alternative to incarceration. And of course, individuals have to pay for that. Every aspect of a prison now is essentially privatized. The food service, the phone, the tablets, the uniforms, the commissary, you name it. So as with, any, if you look at the military industrial complex, this is really the origin of the term prison industrial complex, and it's true. That's what capitalism does. It finds markets, and this is a huge one because states, again, are spending billions of dollars. The Arizona State Prison budget is 1.5 billion with a B this year. And a lot of that is to private prison operators and the absolutely dismal private company that has taken over healthcare, resulting in a lawsuit against the state. And so it keeps that. It definitely keeps that system churning, right? There is incentive to continue making that profit. And there certainly is going to be then opposition to reform in really unlikely places. If you look at where prisons are located in the state of Arizona, these small towns, it's often former mining communities, right? In Pinal County, for example, where prisons have become the entire basis of their local economy. They are literally dependent on this system to survive. And actually our prison director, David Shin, acknowledged that publicly recently. So that's certainly a piece of it. And, looking again at then these alternatives, it does give us a way to thread that needle, right? Is to say that actually we can invest in these other kinds of interventions in all of our communities. And that's job creation. And it's something that is going to be more organic and infinitely better for the individuals seeking employment. Because I can tell you, while there are lots of jobs working as a prison guard, they are not good jobs. And the high rate of turnover really, I think, demonstrates that. So it is certainly a major impediment to change, the entrenched nature of just how much money is circulating as a result of mass incarceration. But again, I think we can offer something better, and focusing on those small level interventions and growing them locally, I think also diffuses a lot of the opposition and the fear of, what if we close this prison overnight and then no one has a job? Although I'd love to do that too, for the record.
Thank you, Caroline, for connecting the dots to the structural to the individual there. I think there's an additional question from the classroom.
Yes, Maddie, 1 second, please. Mohammed first, and then Jasmine. Incarceration rate of people of color. What do you think we have to do as a society to move forward? And instead of you more of our community before, it's more like our community before, and what do we do? And what changes are we making in the state? Okay. Maddie, did you catch any of that? I have very bright students, but they're really testing my ability to restate questions. Okay. So Nahami's question was excellent. The question is, given that we know that the research shows that both white communities and communities of color use drugs, all kinds of drugs, fairly equally in equal proportion, clearly there's been a disproportionate number of folks of color being imprisoned and jailed for that drug use. And so the question is, what can we do sort of both from a prevention standpoint to address that mismanage, like that mismatch of folks of color getting imprisoned, as well as changing sort of the current policies and penalties to help even that out. Now, how many is that close? That was a half-hearted yeah, but that's what we got.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's huge, right? Like there is no question that our criminal punishment system is a demonstration of clear systemic racism, right? No question. People of color at every point of contact are more likely to get pulled into the system. They're more likely to get pulled over. They're more likely to get arrested. They're more likely to get detained. They're more likely to get held in jail without bail, more likely all the way through the chain for practically everything. But certainly drug crime, as a result of much of the rhetoric around it, is one where we see those disparities very clearly. And as a result, you know, certainly in a state like Arizona, you see, you know, the disparities are clear, right? So African Americans are about 3-5% of the Arizona general population and 13% of our incarcerated population. And Latinx folks are now the single largest demographic group in terms of numbers in our state prisons, right? And they're about 35% of the state population. There is no question. So that's related to both our drug policies and practically every other criminal justice policy that we have. So in terms of solutions, yes, once again, you know, reframing the issue of drug use and substance abuse and behavioral health as a public health issue and not a criminal act would be monumental. And in terms of prevention, then it's really tricky, right? Because we're not trying, as the student very correctly stated, in terms of statistical drug use, it's about the same. We don't need to prevent anything except racist policing and racist policies in criminal justice. So this becomes a question of policy, leadership, and making our laws. So again, going back to being an educated voter, looking at the track record of, say, a county attorney who's seeking re-election or election in the place where you live. Take a look at your county jail population and your statistics. We did a report, it's pretty old now, 2015. It was actually the first time anyone actually looked at drug sentencing data in the state of Arizona. And that's one of the real challenges that we have, is there's no aggregate sentencing data for the entire state. Every county prosecutes their own cases. They keep their own data, in some cases like in paper files in boxes. And it's very, very difficult to be able to get statewide data to look at trends. So we actually hired third-year law students to physically go into 3 counties, court buildings, and pull these files. You know, the results were pretty interesting, actually, where, you know, one of the interesting trends that we saw is in terms of geographic differences, right? Where the prosecutions in, say, Yavapai County were incredibly harsh on drug crimes. Like the average number of charges brought by prosecutors in Yavapai County were something like 3 times that of Maricopa County. So understanding who plays a role, who makes these kinds of decisions, whether it be the policy or enacting the policy, is one place where we actually can have a voice.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Caroline.
Karen.
That was, oh, sorry, Maddie. That was very helpful. Jasmine, we have another question. Did y'all catch that?
We caught none of that, so please do restate. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, I'm trying to work with the volume button. Jasmine, one more time real quick. Okay, so Jasmine's question is, if you could, Caroline, please elaborate a little bit more on evidence-based practices that, and whether or not that actually ends up being more helpful or harmful to the communities in which with which they're actually hopefully trying to help and assist.
Wow, Jasmine, that's a great question, and I don't want to pretend like I have studied that whole field of criminology or related research. I think that in general, something that Dr. Gomez in our office really raised and then became the underpinning of much of her research and the work that's grown out of it is, you always want to investigate, well, whose evidence are we basing our practices on, and how was that evidence compiled, right? So some of that is, like just data collection, surveys, or it's academic studies. And that doesn't make it invalid, but I think it is really important to note that very rarely are the impacted people the ones who are viewed as the experts, or the folks whose voices are centered in determining how policies need to change. We often saw this in our work in that, say, a formerly incarcerated person is going to be sort of trotted out to tell their terrible story, right? About how something needs to change. And then it's almost like they get a pat on the head and like, okay, now the grownups are going to talk about the policy, right? As community-based organizations, we need to do community-based research. And statistics and data are good and important, but to situate that with people's lived experience, because that's going to provide insights and nuances that many researchers or folks in positions of authority are just not going to have, because that's not their life. And so those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and Martin's famous phrase, and farthest from the resources. That's really true. And so, like, let's talk to the people closest to the problem who are going to understand the problem in a way that folks that have not had that lived experience couldn't possibly. And then we put those together, right? These are incredibly difficult and thorny and nuanced issues. So the more that we can be gathering and providing facets to understand these problems through those lenses, the better off we all are. I hope that answers your question.
You're raising really important questions for all of us, scholars, novice researchers, advocates, activists for change, about what it means to do this work, engage in it ethically. And I know it's really challenging to do so. And what does it mean to be an ethical storyteller? a person who's trying to mobilize people to tell their stories, to what end, and who will be there to hold them up after they've shared their story with the public as well. To that end, and kind of in a parallel way to help wrap up our session today, I wanted to have you reflect with us about what it takes to do this work longitudinally. What does it take to take care of yourself and each other while you are engaged in this really tough work? So could you share a little bit about what we can learn from your own experience and the experience you have working with others in community on community justice?
I really appreciate the question, because we are all struggling, I think, right now. The pandemic, the world on fire, the last few years has been incredibly hard for most of us, notwithstanding any of this other stuff. But then to be engaged in social justice work has always been hard, particularly when we are doing what I just talked about, which is asking directly impacted people to engage in that process. That's asking a lot. And again, Dr. Gomez was so incredibly influential and in stressing how we need to take responsibility for that and create opportunities for care for folks within that, to attend to trauma, right? Like having people talk about the worst thing that ever happened to them publicly is a lot to ask. But in general, I think some of us thrive on fighting, right? For some of us, that is where we're led. That's what feels good. And for some of us, it's to be in the background. So one is find your role, because there's so much that needs to be done, can be done, that doesn't have to be in the spotlight, but is absolutely necessary. I think the other thing, again, I'll be really honest, like part of, you're hearing today, part of our journey as an organization from this legislative advocacy piece fight, which, we gave our all to, and then had to regroup and say, is this working? And is this where we belong? As an organization, to be true to our values, it was a stretch. It was very taxing for our staff that were put in that position to engage with those systems, listen to people say very harmful things. And so much of that work is about compromise, right? Incremental change is about compromise. And that's not a thing that we actually do very well. And that's not to say that it isn't important and necessary, but it's not something we're good at. Because that just feels like throwing somebody under the bus, right? That is like, we're going to constantly carve people out of eligibility for these changes that we're trying to make. And that just was not really, in the end, I think, who we are. And so I'll be honest with you, this pivot to community-based work, is what we truly believe is necessary and is the next thing, that until we have the what instead, until we have this other vision to present, all that reform effort is just going to kind of keep hitting the wall. But also, it is way more fun to be able to talk to you about how badass David Garcia is than to talk to you about what a horrible human being the chair of the Judiciary Committee is. And to engage with these organizations as partners and be inspired by them and fired up to go out and like get them absolutely all the money and attention and tell people how cool they are. So it's all needed and necessary, and you just find your fight. So whoever you all are in these classrooms, find your fight. It's there, right? And you have something unique and special to contribute to whatever piece of this you take on. And then you got to trust that other people are taking care of the other stuff, and you don't have to do all of it.
Caroline, we do have one more student who wants to ask a question, and I know that each of us figuring out to find our fight. I love that phrase, find your role and find the lever of change that you want to be involved in. So I'm going to toss it to Chris for one last brief question before we wrap it up.
Hey, Maddie, sorry about that. So Caroline, our last question is a really intriguing one. And I know we're kind of short on time, so I'll make it really brief, which is, could you just speak really briefly to the role of this idea of like the community policing, sort of that see something, say something, turning in your neighbor, that sort of movement or phenomenon that we've been working towards? Like, and how that impacts, if that impacts your work at all, or what you've seen vis-a-vis the community aspect of it.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a tricky one. And I think, I'll just say there's room for all of it, right? Our house is on fire. People in prison are suffering right now. People in jail are suffering right now. People in community need help. And so if there are, and I believe that there are folks that really want to see institutions like policing do better, and they can do better. And this is a long-term project. So until we're able to create that world in which prisons and jails are unnecessary, which is like, that's our North Star. Until then, if there are folks that that find their work in helping institutions address racism, address their lack of knowledge or understanding around mental health issues, substance abuse, then that's all for the good. But as for JCA, our stated goal is to focus our time and attention on creating alternatives and programs that exist outside of that system. Again, because that's where I think the greatest innovation can come from. And that's just where we feel called to do the work. I realize I'm kind of half stepping here, but that's the best I can do.
We really appreciate it. We really appreciate your time, Caroline. And we're throwing us pretty complex questions at you with less than -2 minutes to go. So we really appreciate your efforts. So if I can take a second and have my class appreciate you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Maddie and Michael, of course, for helping us get organized. Maddie, I don't know if you had any closing comments, but I just wanted to say that for our class.
Sure. I'm just going to close by saying that we have our third. First of all, thank you so much, Caroline Isaacs. Just Communities AZ, find it, find her, find the work, find the research. Know that people's legacies who have invested so much time and effort in creating these new ideas and building on ones that came before it live on here in Arizona and elsewhere. And that we will continue seeking justice in Arizona with our third and final speaker, Dr. Taylor, who's coming to us to speak about reproductive justice in real time. By the time we meet a week from Wednesday at the same time, 3 o'clock, for this third conversation, we may have a court decision about, at least a tentative one, about what law is going to regulate the provision of healthcare services in the state of Arizona. So the confusion that people are experiencing today will be a central piece of our conversation a week from this Wednesday. In the meantime, we've had an opportunity to really reflect on what safety means to us personally, as a family, as a member of a community. And I love the invitation to try to envision what would safety mean to us, and what can we do today, tomorrow, next week to try to have more of it in our everyday lives, and appreciate the work you're doing, Caroline, to get us that much closer. We can fight what is, but we can also build towards what we want to be. And that's part of really what the inspiration was for the series. So we appreciate you embodying that so well, and wish you the best in this work in community. And thank you to all the students, the staff, the educators, the community members who were part of our conversation this afternoon. We wish you a good and safe evening. Take care.
Thank you all so much.